Welcome to the library studio here at the YAHOWAH blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn, and I'm happy to rejoin our series, Return to the Garden. For those who may be unaware, this is the full circle of God's story. Man's relationship with God began in Gan Eden. It was a very long time ago, 6,000 years to be exact. God does not say that Adam, the name of the man, Adam also means man, who he gave a nesama, a conscience to, was the first human, nor the first animal, to be sure, but he was the first to be created in God's image, which means that he had this attribute of a conscience, a nesama, the ability to differentiate between right and wrong, good and bad, productive and counterproductive. Unfortunately, the experience in the garden did not go well. That is the story we're exploring now, and I want to share with you all of the reasons why it did not go well, while it was really a disaster. Man did not live up to expectations. We didn't listen. We didn't respond. We were lethargic and inactive. We didn't contribute. And we most certainly were not reliable. And so God foreclosed on the experiment, at least within the sheltered enclosure, and moved us out to a much larger sheltered enclosure, which is the earth itself. And there we've had 6,000 years to get our act together, to acquire the knowledge that would lead us back to the garden, back to the Tree of Lives. And it is that story which we are telling here, and how one story of the exodus from the garden leads us to the conditions that we will need to ascribe if we wish to return. So as we pick up the story in Bereshit, the second chapter, the 9th statement, it reads, YAHOWAH, who is God Almighty. If you, by the way, are reading along in a favorite Bible translation and it does not read YAHOWAH, then whoever published it is lying to you. That's a shame. When it comes to the word of our God, one should not deceive. One should not lie. It does not say the Lord God. It says YAHOWAH, Elohim. YAHOWAH as God. He enabled life to sprout out and grow. He enabled the shamak. The shamak is Dowd, the great branch of the Tree of Lives. From Ha-Adamah, the ground of the earth. Ha-Adamah is the bloody red man of the earth who, as the parah, the productive bull, will purge the guilt of Yisra'el prior to Dowd's return, doing so on Teruah, so that the great homecoming can transpire on Kippurim. These two men were initially linked by way of the greater and lesser luminaries of Bereshit Genesis 1. They're the two men who serve as signs for the Moedim, these restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony. And here we find these same two individuals presented first as the shamak, the great branch, and the Adamah, this bloody red man who emerges from the ground of the earth. And that isn't the end of the unification of these two characters in God's story, because we're about to be introduced to and discuss this relationship between the two trees, the Tree of Lives and the Tree of Knowledge. This then represents tree as singular, and it says the entire tree, which is a productive, upright branch with firmly embedded roots, branches which reach up to absorb the light of the sun. It is from etzah, which means to provide counsel and advice through diligence and effort on the entirety of the plan and the purpose of developing a backbone while overcoming challenges to advocate for the proper response. That is the purpose of this tree. God said that he is delightful, desirable, and pleasing. He is fruitful in delivering the productive and treasured harvest. He is the final Zeroah. He is the Adamah Parah, the productive bull. All to visually portray that which is clear and comprehensible, conveying a supernatural revelation. He is the observant foreigner that will convey, as Dod's Bashar herald, the very plan that God will fulfill over these next 8 years. And all of this is beneficial and good, productive and pleasing, something to consume if you wish to be nourished. And then here are those two trees. They are the equivalent of the greater luminary, the Gadol Ma'or, and the Katan, the lesser Ma'or, luminary of Bereshith Genesis 1, presented on the 4th day, as the two men who serve as the signs as the Moedim are fulfilled. Here it's Ha'etz, the tree, of Chaim, of lives, of being able to survive this life and enter an eternal life with YAHOWAH. Dowd is the Tree of Lives because he fulfilled Passover, opening the doorway to life. And of course, he was in the center of God's plan, living around year 3,000, 3,000 years from the garden. And it would be 3,000 years after Dowd's first passing to return to the garden. He was in the center, the middle, the midst of the Gan, Ha-Gan, the sheltered garden, this protective, covered, and defended enclosure designed to promote and sustain life, along with Ha-Etz, the tree, the other productive, upright life that was committed to provide counsel and advice through diligence for the purpose of overcoming challenges and to advocate for the proper response, also masculine singular, of Ha-Dayath, the knowledge, the acquisition of information with a focus on the application of discernment and judgment for the purpose of perceiving and comprehending. It is from Yada, to know, to be familiar with, and to understand. Good and productive. Tob, that which is beneficial and proper, favorable and desirable, agreeable and pleasing, as well as of bad, that which is evil, harmful, wrong, erroneous, corrupt, morally inappropriate, malignant, disagreeable. Bereshith in the beginning, 2:9, and of course there is so much more. This is because Yada, as the Choter, is the tree of knowledge. God said so when he called this tree the Etz Dayath. And he said in his presentation of the Choter, presenting him as an observant branch, a Netzar, as one who has roots, Shemesh, and as one who would be the Etzah of Dayath, the spirit of Etzah, the spirit of Dayath. He is the tree of knowledge. That is the nature of the Choter. Just as Dowd is the tree of lives, having opened Passover's door. And all of this is because the Gadol Maor, the greater luminary, fulfilled Passover in year 4,000 Yah, consistent with that narrative on the 4th day in Genesis 1. And it is the lesser luminary that reflects his life so that you might know of it and capitalize upon it. So collectively, these are among the greatest discoveries ever made, pursuant to God, and they are all derived here for you by Yada as the Choter and as the tree of knowledge, regarding Dowd as our Savior and as the tree of lives. Without Yada, one who knows, as the Etz Dayath, there is no life beyond human mortality, because the means to the Bayeth through the Moed in the Torah, as enabled by Dowd, would have remained unknown. And That is the lesson of the garden, of the Torah, and of the prophets, as revealed by Yahweh. Whether you like it or not, Yada plays the essential role in Yahweh's plan to restore his son's acclaim, so that God can reconcile his relationship with Yisra'el, just less than 8 years from now. These things known, I surely wish I had derived all of these conclusions sooner, but of course, better late than never, and it is now especially timely, because prior to coming out of the closet and admitting that, there was a group that claimed that they spoke for a mommy god. Well, when they emerged, it took me right back to this, because I knew that the story of YAHOWAH reflected the instigator of that cult. And as we returned, it is then that we discovered that they had also been wrong when they denounced the role of the Choter and claimed it was messianic. And now we know otherwise. Choter is the tree of knowledge. Unless you want your Messiah to be a tree, in the sense of the tree of knowledge, he is not messianic. The Messiah is the tree of lives. That's why he fulfilled Pesach. The other fellow, he is the tree of knowledge, which is why he wrote a series called YadaYahowah, and 35 books, all available free for you at YadaYah.com. But it's through this and their posted AI chatbox XA denouncing my role as the Choter that claimed that it had to be messianic and therefore apply to Jesus. And, well, they were wrong in every report, but by bringing us here, back here again, to analyze God's testimony, we made one of the greatest discoveries ever. So I'm grateful for that. The Choter stem and sucker is giving the fallen and neglected tree new life, such that it is productive again, bearing fruit. He is, as Ha-Nakri, the observant foreigner, is metaphorically the Netzir, the observant branch that was presented in that narrative. He is the Choter with Sheresh, roots, who is so steadfast, as would be expected all of a tree. And consistent with Yahweh's depiction, Yada is Parah. He is productive. It is the Adamah Parah, of course, that is the productive bull that is actually the man. It's bloody man from the earth. He is the one who fulfills the Teruah harvest and the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah in anticipation of Dowd's return. Yes, Yada is the Katan Meor, the lesser luminary, and the Etz Deah, the tree of knowledge, because he is Yada, the one who knows. He is prophetically portrayed as the Choter, the stem, and as the Adamah Parah, this productive and bloody man of the earth who is a bull. Enabled by the 7 Ruach of Yahweh, his primary purpose is to direct the world's attention to what Dowd has accomplished, to make him the Gadol Meor, the greater luminary, to recognize him as the Etz Chaim, the tree of lives. And then, at the end, he offers himself as a sacrifice to fulfill Teruah and purge the remnant of Yisrael so that they're prepared for the king's return. So using Yahweh's Ruach of Benah, of understanding, Yada has made the connections to comprehend that the story of the garden is prophetic. It's not just history. For those that would say, oh, maybe there's a garden account, some other lore, therefore it was just pilfered, it's mythology. No, it's prophetic. It's talking about what we are experiencing and will experience over the next 8 years. It depicts where we have been and where we're headed, as well as how we're going to arrive at our intended destination. The Etzah Council of the Trees is the fruit of the Etzah Diath. And it is being offered by the Choter as the Nesh banner as presented in Isaiah 11 in the treatise on the Choter and conveyed throughout YadaYahowah. And we are told prophetically that Yahweh will raise this Nesh, this banner, written by the Choter, regarding the fruit of the Etz Sa'adayath, to call his people home. For the doubters and naysayers, I understand. It's a lot to absorb. We're just, 2 chapters into the Torah. And we have pushed the boundaries of human comprehension well beyond what has been previously considered. But that is proof in and of itself. And what we will soon discover is that between Barashith 1 and 2, Dabarim 18 and 29, Bamidbar 5, 11, 12, 13, 14, and especially 15, and then 19, Yahweh has made his case on behalf of Dowd and Yada, on behalf of the ram and the bull, the greater and lesser luminaries, the trees of lives and of knowledge. Then, over the next 10 centuries of prophets, God affirmed this same story and the relationship between these men perhaps 1,000 times over. And so now we know why Yahweh buttressed the meaning of Etz with Etzah, as he conveyed it in Yeshaya 11, revealing that this tree would provide counsel and advice through diligence and effort on the entirety of God's plan. The first to frame the portrait that God has painted from us, conveying the purpose of overcoming challenges while advocating on behalf of the proper response, even in the face of open defiance. Precisely what God was communicating to us. Just as Etz becomes Etzah, along with other spiritual attributes afforded the Choter, as he is a singular male, the same applies to Par Bull, proving productive when conveyed even in Yeshaya 11 as Parah. This is even similar to Adam, man, becoming Adamah, when more is required of this individual. Building on our foundation of knowledge, Etz is related to Etzab, a verb with the added connotation of performing by shaping and fashioning a picture or image of something, particularly one that God is trying to convey, such that it is properly framed. And while obviously a positive endeavor, the secondary definition reveals that the resulting picture can be distorted by others, such that when it is perverted, it will grieve those who misrepresent God's intent and those who are fooled by them. Additionally insightful, when trying to process all of this, we learn that this Etz tree, Asab, making him one who works for another. Yes, the Etz serves Dowd as the tree of knowledge, as the king's herald, and even as the Etz Chaim, Dowd is Yahweh's co-worker. We both do the job of our supervisor, whether it's as the king requested, which is what the tree of knowledge does, or the tree of lives, as he even heralds his sovereign, his father. Additionally, relevant to this discussion, Etzeb describes hard work, and that it has been an endeavor that is particularly difficult, one that is challenging, requiring considerable effort, even as the process can be mentally anguishing at times. I talk to friends regularly about really how hard life can be. We've had 2 members of our inner circle who have lost loved ones, a father-in-law and a mother here just recently. Another is suffering marital separation. And life can be tough. Our beloved Shannon that came through here and has met most covenant members had to endure the most bitter of all pills, the passing of his son at 17 years old. It's tragic. I tell people, though, it's all about how we overcome these things, how we deal with difficulties in our life, how it shapes us to be stronger, how we gain in confidence through them. And, my friend that is going through a separation at this time, he had something that very few of us, relatively few, enjoy. And that is a really, really good marriage for a very long time. Two people who were exceedingly good and loyal to one another, who have raised marvelous children. And the woman in our covenant who just lost her mother, she's been blessed by having a mother that loved her, a mother that was of noble qualities. And my good friend who has recently, not recently, but some time ago, lost his son at 17, a drive-by shooting, that he had the great distinction of knowing that his son came to know Yahweh and advocated on behalf of the covenant. And so even in these travesties, there was success. Look at Moshe and how he had to overcome being attacked by his sister Miriam as his wife was assaulted by his sister. And look at Dowd as he had to overcome the challenge posed by his son Absalom and the coup that he delivered, and that he rebounded, going on to fulfill Pesach, Matsah, and Bakurim for us. It really is the story all the way through. And it's how we grow. It's how God learns that he can rely upon us, that he knows we're resilient, we're trustworthy. We can do as he envisioned, which is to reflect his qualities. Now, as for me, I have suffered my share of pain. I've grown through it. And I don't think I would trade any of it, because it's helped hone the character that I have today, the confidence that I have today. And I have now invested 24 years of 12-hour days in YadaYahowah. Sure, it's been rewarding, but it's also been anguishing at times to see its insights twisted and, even worse, sometimes ignored. But even this was something Yahweh anticipated, a realization that will become evident when I present the motive for the fall of man. It is as it should be. Now, fascinated by the possibilities, while noting the profoundly important role that this tree of knowledge plays, because God's not going to mention the Tree of Lives again. The story revolves around the Tree of Knowledge. He may be the lesser of the two trees, but not at this time. He may be the lesser of the two luminaries, but again, not at this time. That will change soon enough, and I'll be delighted when it does. But you need to know this story revolves around the Tree of Knowledge and of those. Tree also plays a major role in the reawakening of Yisra'el, so that they come to understand who Dowd is as the Messiah and King, our Savior, the very Son of God, on the cusp of Israel as a mortal remnant returning to the garden. So let's consider our King's reference to Atzah, as I have shared with you, which is the actionable root of Etz tree. Its loan use was by Dowd in the 16th Mishal word picture proverb. It's clearly prophetic of the frustrating experience with the deranged cult of mother goddesses that have been so hostile to us, trying to defame Yahweh, Dowd, and his herald. It reads, the one who closes, I should say, the one who shuts out advice and counsel regarding the totality of the plan and its purpose and the instruction that is provided after consultation and calculation to assist in the proper decision-making process. Their eyes to the proper and full accounting and overall determined value of this thoroughly considered and recording plan. That one is like an annoying insect, a malicious blood-sucking mosquito, in hypocritical pursuit of slanderous and malicious speech to discredit and to defame. Hallucinating while causing a perverse and irrational reaction. Becoming entirely evil, determined to advance that which is completely wrong, and doing so in the end by perishing in their own depravity, fulfilling the destructive nature of what is now prophetically pronounced regarding them, as they are miserable malcontents, both ruinous and wicked. That was Proverbs 16:30. Now, since it is likely that Yahweh inspired Dowd in this case to write these words, God knows them, this belligerent cast of characters, better than I, and he isn't impressed. And so it is enlightening and edifying to witness the way God supports and defends those who serve with him, who advocate on behalf of his Son. By following his example, our steps are guided. And even here, as we ponder the implications of the tree of knowledge in the context of the woman who would covet it, YAHOWAH, we find an explanation of exactly what the modern incarnation of YAHOWAH has done by prioritizing her desires over Yahweh's instructions. So after introducing these two trees, the of lives and knowledge, God identified the river, which came out of Eden. He said that it was used to water the Gan, which I suspect is because Yahweh will cause a great upwelling of water to emerge from the Temple Mount, commensurate with the sacrifice of the Adam of Perah, thereby keeping these accounts properly synced. That's when we read the story of the adulterous woman in Numbers 5. We hear about all of the water mixed with ash that will purify this woman in anticipation of her being betrothed to her returning king, Dowd. So Yahweh revealed that this Nahar, this stream of enlightenment and joy, parad, that separated and Haya came to exist as four Rosh leaders, would actually be Moshe, Dowd, Eliah, and Yada. Although at this time they were known as the Pishon, the Gishon, the Shekekel, and the Parath. But their story is depicted in Bereshith 2:10 through 2:14 for us to decipher. And when we do, we recognize that Pishon is from Pasha with the own suffix, and it addresses the entirely rebellious nature of the Israelites encircling Moshe throughout the Exodus. It is the single most prevalent theme of the Exodus story. Now, of them, Yahweh said that they went around and around, turning every which way, while Chulia anguished and in travail. Gishon is all things pertaining to Gish, being brought forth, bursting onto the scene, as in someone being born. It depicts Dowd, the Son of God, who was brought forth and given to us, the child who was born, the Son who was given. His 3 lives would change the world forever. As for the Chedekel, it is from Chedek, revealing that Eliah, of course, would be the thorn in the sides of the religious and political. He is the one who serves as a sarcastic prick to pierce through the nasty facade of the religious of the day and those who advocated a political solution. As such, he is shown literally as this thorn in the side of Asher, the mother goddesses of Assyria, who is also the whore of Babylon. The Parah of course, is the Euphrates, and as such, it is the river that drains the swamp of Babel, the commingling of confusing religious and political edicts. And it is from here that Judaism's Talmud, of course, was conceived. It was from here that the Quran was first written. And as for the name, it is from Parah, and therefore addresses the productive and fruitful bull, the Adamah, Parah. Now, God seldom misses an opportunity to paint portraits with words. It is his specialty. So we should expect the same going forward. And here we read, Yahweh, Almighty, rationally, he grasped hold of the man Adam, and he settled him restfully. He nuach him. He placed him, settling him down after settling all unresolved issues to foster an association, an alliance. It's a derivation of ruach, spirit. In the Gan, in this sheltered garden of Eden, of great joy, total satisfaction in favorable situations. And he was settled here to abad, to work it. La abad he, to work it, to labor in her, to serve her, to cultivate it, and to closely observe her. La shamar he, to pay attention, closely examining, carefully considering what was there. The purpose of Adam, of man, has been identified. He was placed in this protective garden as an opportunity to see if he could make a contribution. And if taken beyond this, to explore the universe that God created, would he be observant? Would he be thoughtful? Would he be a good travel companion? Somebody who is excited by what's around the next bend. Excited, open-eyed, anticipating what they're going to experience next. This is what God was looking for. Someone with whom he could contribute and make the universe better, life better, the relationship better, and who was especially observant and thoughtful. Well, the initial verbs suggest an agenda that would eventually play out over time. Fathers lakach, grasp hold of their children so that they can stand up and, well, walk with them. And that is why there are 5 hands in Yahweh's name, with the largest of them reaching down and out with an open hand to grasp his people as they raise their hands up in the 2 hays, reaching up to him. Continuing to tie these stories together, of course, after introducing the central cast, Yahweh used nuach, settled spiritually, to foretell how the ruach, spirit of Yahweh, would nuach al-hu, settle upon the man serving as the Choter, as Yahweh spoke through Yeshaya in Isaiah 11:2, with the repetition of this very same verb, separated as these 2 narrations were by 700 years. The realization that Gan is from Gana and means to shelter, to protect, and cover, to defend, reminds us that this is the intent also of Sukkah, shelters, because its root, sakak, is defined identically. Therefore, what was, will be. This next time, however, we're going to be better equipped and prepared such that we prove worthy of God's attention and his trust. And central to mankind's restoration, if you will, in Gan 2 is the placement of the Tree of Knowledge and of Lives, one leading to the other. Of course, even the name of the garden reveals Yahweh's overall intent. He wanted to enjoy being with us. Eden means joyous. The letters forming this delightful moniker reveal that the doorway to life can be seen here. Now, this is true not only because we find Dowd, the beloved, in the center of Eden as the Tree of Lives, The Gan is a celebration of life. And so in Gan Eden, we witness the Son of God as the door to life, having fulfilled Passover. But, of course, there's more to living than just laughs. We're reminded that man was conceived to abide, to work, to make a contribution with God wherever and whenever we are planted. It is our highest calling in life. Moshe, Dowd, Elia, and Yada all serve as examples of men whose lives have been committed to collaborating with Yahweh, doing whatever he asks of us. And the diligence of this collaboration is never superficial. It is never momentary. It endures. And as we know from the Torah, God's foremost request for us is also that we are observant. We are shamar, closely examining and carefully considering his revelations to us. That is because he wants to take us through the universe that he has conceived and wants to have companions that are excited by what they witness, what they consider. When we do these things, of course, we're rewarded, as has been the case with this examination of what occurred in the garden, paying attention to the characters in the story as well as to the trees. So right from the outset, as a caring father, Yahweh provided instructions for us to follow such that our lives might be prolonged, productive, and of course, fulfilling. While God has shared a plethora of prophetic portraits, this is the very thing that is directly presented to unify God and man. And you'll notice that Yahweh, in this instance, he did the talking, and Adam was supposed to listen. This is the pattern that God established for our lives, particularly while we remain on earth. People have asked, what is that silver sculpture that is to my right as we do the series of The Voice on Dowd's Mizmor in our Ocean studio? It's a visual reminder. It's time to, so that we, that's what it means. Stop praying. Start listening if you want to be on the same page with Yahweh. So this reads, Yahweh Almighty, he provided direction concerning the man, Adam, saying, from every tree of the Gan, this sheltered garden, you may continually and actually eat. Barishith, Genesis 2:16. When Yahweh started and shared this instruction and conveying it in the Peel Imperfect, he revealed that it was for the man's benefit and that it would affect his life in a meaningful and ongoing manner. This is to say that the shawah, the direction, was enabling and it was sustaining. Moreover, just as a friendly reminder here, throughout we find Yahweh, of course, continuing to speak in the masculine and singular voice. Now, while it's subtle, all actually means that God was over the man in close proximity, but not beside him. All of God won't fit in our universe, much less on one planet or in one person or in a sheltered garden. When we read about God doing something, it's always as a result of him projecting an aspect of his nature and influence into lesser dimensions. And speaking of the other guy, as we know, Ha-Adam, literally rendered, it means the man, whereas Adam is simply a transliteration of the Hebrew noun. So God was hovering above the man, projecting an aspect of his nature. So before we press on, you'll note that Yahweh said that Adam could eat from any tree of the garden with akal, eat, repeated for emphasis. This is important because Chawa misrepresented this instruction in her discussion with the serpent. Then when addressing the tree of knowledge, a call was negated and not repeated, then buttressed by the imperfect conjugation to say, you should not make a habit of continually eating from it. This is because as a consequence during a day, you will absolutely die, with muth repeated here again to underscore the consequence. Also, Yahweh's subsequent instruction pertained exclusively to the tree of knowledge. This is because he didn't want its purpose preempted or its fruit consumed before the door to life was opened by his beloved son, Dowd. He said, however, from the tree of YadaYahowah, knowledge, of Tov, good, proper, productive, and pleasing, and Ra, bad, wrong, troubling, and harmful, do not make a habit of continuing to eat. Don't do so from it because of the consequence. During a day, by defining and depicting yourself as having consumed from it, you will come to personify death. You're going to die, ceasing to exist forevermore. Genesis 2:17. You see, there was no religious, political, or conspiratorial consumption in the garden, no militias to corrupt anyone, no lies, no liars. So there was no merit in perusing and education on what's wrong with these counterproductive human contrivances. Now, as someone who has written 13 books systematically refuting Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, I know that the process of excoriating these plagues is laborious. It's frustrating indeed. It can be miserable at times due to the proliferation of malignant notions and, well, a plethora of logical fallacies. And even then, there was no point to condemning that which wouldn't actually exist for millennia. Not then. Well, God realized that someone had to eventually repudiate religion in order for his people to finally be free of this plague. The endeavor had to be properly timed to combat the religiosity of the last 2 millennia. Unfortunately, it would be of limited utility since there would be relatively few who would capitalize on the monumental undertaking required to repudiate Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, with many vociferously condemning the result. And yet, without Babel, Twistianity, and goddamn religion, those 13 volumes, the clutter obscures the truth. And it must be cleared for Yahweh's testimony to be seen and to be heard. Therefore, what was deadly then, before religion infected men's minds, is now essential as the antidote to cure them of it. YadaYahowah and the Yahweh vlog have become the tree of knowledge, without which there is no way back to Dowd or the Tree of Lives. This is why Adam was told that prematurely devouring it would be destructive, leading to continual and unrelenting death. The diath provided by Yada, and on behalf of Dowd, became the fruit of life when he realized that our Messiah and King fulfilled Passover, opening the door to life. That is the fruit of the harvest. YadaYahowah introduces mankind to Dowd's plan to fulfill these mikre, God's support of his son in this plan, that collectively enable the benefits of the bereth through the mikre as prescribed in the Torah and as fulfilled by Dowd and portrayed by the Nabi. Without this knowledge, there just is no salvation. There's no reconciliation. There's no eternal life. The lesser luminary may only be reflecting the sun's brilliance, but he would have to serve as a sign of the Moedim to convey what the sun achieved prior to his return, for there to be a homecoming and a family reunion. It is only when these initial stories are juxtaposed that we unlock the 6,000-year-old mystery of why death was the consequence of disregarding Yahweh's instructions pursuant to this tree of knowledge, and why, once introduced, nothing more was said about the tree of lives. This answer has been staring us in the face, revealing that the branches of these trees are so intertwined that they can only be understood when seen together. Knowledge leads to life when it is understood that Dowd made it possible for man to live forever by fulfilling Chag Matsah in year 4000 Yah, 33 CE. And even then, after doing so, the Tree of Lives would remain unknown until the Choter stem revealed what the Shamak, this branch representing Dowd, had achieved. Yes, even in the Choter and the Shamak, they are stem and branch, just as they are in the greater and lesser luminary. Had this discovery, of course, gone unnoticed, had one not served the other, a day would come when the earth would have been swallowed in death, and man would be no more. The Etz would have to become Chokmah and then Benah by Yahweh, such that the Etzah could be Parah, fruitful, regarding the Dayath, the knowledge of Dowd. In this way, the Katan Meor, the lesser luminary, reveals why the Gadol Meor, the greater luminary, fulfilled the Moedim during the darkness to preclude death in a day. And since the Moedim's methods of renewing life wouldn't be delivered for 4 millennia from this point, and the means to extend life on Teruah was 6 millennia away, the knowledge of these things was protected from being prematurely released by God and from being devoured by Satan and Chawah at this time. It's at the proper time that the death presented by Yada and YadaYahowah has made it possible for man to appreciate what Dowd accomplished by fulfilling Chag Matsah. And with this knowledge, the Shabua Katsir, Teruah Lakat, this purging of the adulterous woman, representing the mortal remnant of Yisra'el, and her family reunion for the king on Yom Kippurim, with the restoration of Gan Eden on Sukkah. It's all now going to play exactly as it was planned. Otherwise, the human experience would be for naught. So as such, the Etz Dayath and its Choter stem, its Tree of Lives, knowledge, are worth protecting by Yahweh. And this explains why Satan and Chawah wanted to devour it, thereby depriving it of bearing its fruit in season. God had a mission to accomplish, a timeline to honor. Also in this narrative, it explains how, why, when, where a man's relationship with God was destroyed. This is something which must be understood if it is to be restored and resolved, right? And for this to transpire, the lessons that very few have considered must be presented so that they're understood. And the instruction becomes then actionable, so that like Noach, we can listen to what God had to say, process it, and then do as he has asked, with our expectation being that he will deliver us from the storm. And he will. Now, this is the reason that YadaYahowah was written and why it serves as the tree of knowledge. Now, equally insightful, like every story that we have returned to reconsider in the Torah, God's Presentation is, of course, also prophetic. This was not told for the benefit of those who experienced it. No, not at all. They learned nothing from it. Or was it told for those who first heard it during the Exodus, because they certainly learned nothing from it? Now, realizing this, Yahweh was able to convey the events of the garden in a manner that would resonate with us today at this time, when the situation is dire and when the lesson is now essential. There's no time remaining. And as such, the narrative of the Choter was Yada's coming out party. The time that I went from anonymous to a named character in God's story, reluctant as I may have been and remain, leading us back to the beginning so that we would be there in the end. That's why God explained to me, even years ago, that his story was coming full circle. Just as he began with a Goy, before there was Yisra'el, so he would end his story with a Goy. Just as we began in the garden so long ago, it is to the garden that we return. By featuring the Tree of Knowledge as the lead character in the opening and closing scenes of God's narrative, of these events as they transpired in Gan Eden, we of course are being invited to come full circle. From its roots buried so long ago, a Choter sucker has emerged, and he is bearing fruit again, doing so throughout YadaYahowah, all to reacquaint the world with Dowd as the beloved lives. Now, while I've made this point previously, it still remains relevant to note that Yahweh communicated his instructions to Adam, not to Chawah. She didn't even exist at the time. The implication is not only that Adam was conceived to learn from God, to listen to God, to respond to God, to engage productively with God, but also that Yahweh seems to prefer communicating through the men he conceived in his image, recognizing that Chawah was conceived in man's image, such that she would listen to him, that she would work with him. So it would be the man's responsibility to share Yahweh's instructions with women. Now, anybody that says, well, that's, pejorative and not fair to women, no, it's actually exceedingly fair and exceedingly beneficial. It's my whole view on things. I'm so delighted that Dowd is has the responsible one, and I report to him. He delivers the edicts, and I respond. It is a much better life to be the person who is taken care of in this regard, who is taught, who gets to learn. It's Dowd's relationship with Yahweh. It's my relationship with Dowd. I cherish it. So did he. So should you. So immediately thereafter, we read something with the haunting implications. Yahweh Almighty said, "It's not good, productive, or beneficial for man, Adam, to exist alone by himself. So I will engage and continually act on his behalf, providing and producing for him a helper and supporter, an Ezer, one who assists and serves, a positive influence who rescues, aids, renews, and provides benefits with the strength and power to accomplish these tasks, like his corresponding counterpart, describing that which is straightforward, right for him, and open to him in his immediate proximity. His Neged, Genesis 2:18. Well, the lessons here, I think, are sevenfold. So let's consider them. First, this means that Yahweh created Adam to enjoy a relationship with him, but it didn't work out. Otherwise, why would God say it's not good for man to be alone? If he was going to continue with him, that wouldn't be a problem, would it? So it means that God created Adam to enjoy a relationship with him, and it did not work out, and God was withdrawing. I don't think anyone has ever told you anything like that before, but isn't that profound? And that's the only rational deduction that can be made from this testimony. Second, this makes it obvious that woman was added to the equation to be with the man. God said that it was not good for man to be alone, but he did not mention himself. He didn't say it's not good for God to be alone. He said it's not good for man to be alone. And so the woman was created so that man would not be alone. That's profound too. Third, Adam was to work with God while YAHOWAH was to work alongside Adam. So while quite literally woman was conceived by God, it was to help and support man. That's what God said. You can challenge him, you can disagree with him. I wouldn't recommend it. I think I would learn from it and say, why did God say this? Because it just worked better that way. We are synergistic. When man goes out and brings home the rabbits, he goes and risks life and limb to provide food, to build shelter, to protect his woman, his family, to be the provider. And life does work out better when the woman supports the home, children, her husband. It's just the way life is most synergetic. It's why men are mostly cerebral and women are mostly of the heart. We work best together that way. Anyway, this is what God is saying. We can ignore it or ponder it and deduce understanding from it. I think that the latter is the better choice. Fourth, it was in man's image that the woman was created, not God's. She would be his counterpart and correspond to him. And that's significant because there are those who want to promote the myth of a mother goddess and use the idea that male and female were committed in the or conceived in the image of God, and that made God a hermaphrodite. It's not true. It's not what God says at all. Quite the opposite. As profoundly as these three insights are for our appreciation of the garden narrative, the fifth lesson is one few have even considered. The only reason that God would have made this statement is that his intent was to part company with man, leaving him. And for this to have been the case, man had to have been a disappointment to God. We failed in the very things that God outlined: work and being observant. Now, reasons for the disconnect may be many beyond these, but I think they are obvious because God said that man was there to abide, to work, and yet Adam showed no initiative. He made no contribution to life in the garden. He was asked to listen and expected to respond appropriately, but he did not. So he failed to demonstrate that he could be trusted. Now, the sixth lesson is that the purpose of man's Ezer, helper, was to correct these problems. While the issues that separated man from God grew much worse, I should share, before they got better over a long chasm of time, once we learned how to work together, as Dowd did with YAHOWAH, and decided to listen to God as the prophets did, and again, as did Dowd, and we stood up after having fallen, which Dowd was, of course, the great exemplar, thereby earning YAHOWAH's trust, the garden could be reestablished so that we could try again. For anyone, by the way, who may be feeling as a woman that you're being disrespected by saying that woman was there to Ezer, help the man. If you think that helping someone is demeaning, then you don't belong in God's family. God is the most powerful influence in the universe, the author of life. He conceived this physical and spiritual and energetic world that we observe around us. He can do most anything he wishes. We are vastly inferior in our present state. And God tells us that with those he chooses to work through, he is our Ezer. So if God views it as positive and favorable for him to Ezer man, then wouldn't it be following God's example for woman to Ezer man? Now the seventh instruction and insight is that without woman, the man would have died alone, separated from God. So for there to be a covenant family, the children born of woman would eventually become the sons and daughters of God. Therefore, the creation of woman became essential to developing the kind of family relationship that Yahweh intended. In fact, we were modeled after this plan where we come together in love and we conceive children, we build shelters for them, we provide nourishment and education and protection for our children, and raise them in a positive environment, helping them be more than we are, that we try to lift them up and give them everything we have to offer. It's a covenant. That's why God doesn't want us bowing down and worshiping him. He wants us to see him supporting us, lifting us up, helping us grow, teaching us how to walk. So then Yahweh Almighty, he fashioned and formed out of the elements of the earth every living animal of the expansive environment, in addition to every bird of the sky, which he brought to the man in order to see what he would call them and how he would greet and welcome them. Therefore, everything for the benefit of the relationship that the man approached and designated, called out to, and encountered, that became the name and reputation of that living soul. Bereshith, Genesis 2:19. So here, the man is shown meeting with the life forms that God created. So God wanted to show off what he had conceived. He thought life was really cool and wanted man to shamar, observe it, consider it, kara, meet with it, engage, make proclamations regarding it. Well, I'm sure God would have preferred man to have been more interactive in this situation. It nevertheless serves to define Yahweh's purpose in conceiving life. And in this case, he not only took the time to share his creative genius with the man by memorializing it, he made certain that we would be aware of this special moment of time. And as it would transpire, this is not only the lone interaction between man and God, it may also be the most relevant. And that he is not depicted doing any of this with a woman. Now, you can make of that what you will, your choice. Now, it's also interesting that the verb kara here suggests that there was dialogue between the animals and man. And I think that is something we will also enjoy going forward. So you'll note that every life form was said to have had a soul. That is also interesting because so many religions make such a big deal of a soul, and a soul is common to all animals, and your soul is exceedingly valuable to you. It's valuable to me, and you can elongate its life by capitalizing on what we're sharing with you here. But you need to know that all animals have a nephesh, and with it, it's, by the way, it's a feminine noun, and that does not turn males into females. But with it, you have the opportunity to perceive your environment and respond to it. Now, I have shared previously that I made way too much of the distinction of the ruach being feminine, and of course, nephesh is also feminine. And just because we have a nephesh soul that is feminine doesn't turn us into women. unless you are a woman, and then you're nephesh, feminine soul. I guess that's a nice mesh. But it's the same thing with ruach. God has a ruach that does not, and by the way, God also has a nephesh, doesn't make YAHOWAH a mother. Of course, this is the insistence of the cult that has been so nasty towards us and towards Yahweh's name and towards Dowd's accomplishments. Oh, just as this experience with the animals was conceived by Yahweh as a learning experience for Adam, such that the nature of the Torah and the Nabi has become more better comprehended by all of us as a result of these reviews. I have now gone back to considering why God's narrative regarding the trees in the garden and Chahwah's response is so prolific. Why God devoted so much energy to telling us about them. And, if some of this seems familiar to it, because a couple of months ago we devoted an entire family hour to the commonality between Chahwah and some annoyances that we were experiencing. And this is essential to us, because now here we have absolute proof that the Choter that is presented in Yashayah is indeed the same individual as the YadaYahowah, this tree of knowledge. And we understand how these spiritual attributes come together. And I would not have noticed this gift of the Ruach to the Choter, who is masculine singular, had not God made this connection for us between Etzah, adroitly identifying the Choter with this Etz tree in the garden. So I would say what's at issue here is perhaps the most important lesson of all. It's the more we shamar, as God conceived Adam to do, to be observant, the more we yada come to know. The more we yada come to know, we begin to understand. Doing so by chokmah, thinking intelligently. And eventually, after decades of study, we can produce the fruit offered by the YadaYahowah, this tree of knowledge. That's the purpose of the Choter, making his nesh sign, YadaYahowah. Now, this is to say, Yahweh has given us what we need to know and understand. But the process often requires a lifetime of work. It is not a data dump. It's a process. Just as we have witnessed here in the garden, we are not given chokmah, but instead afforded the means to it. And this is how it will be forevermore. Making eternity interesting, making it productive for both God and for man. And that means we must constantly discover new things, learn as a result, grow as a consequence, refine our conclusions based upon the evidence we are examining, correct our mistakes, build upon all that is verifiable and true. It is how we grow. And without growth, neither we nor God can be infinite or even interesting. Now, if we were to return for a moment to my misappropriation, whereby I pushed the envelope of Hebrew grammar too far regarding the Ruach, my projection of femininity was germane to the story. It appeared necessary to explain something Dowd later resolved when he became the Tree of Lives. So in this case, I learned from our king. And I know I've shared these insights with you, but they bear repeating because they are essential to knowing this whole process and how we go from one place to another, and how we grow, how we learn, how we become better equipped to be interesting companions with God and to teach others how to join us in this process. So at issue with me was the mechanism behind Matsah, which is the Mowed where the fungus of yeast is removed from our souls. And my confusion was over why we were asked to approach the Isha, which is the feminine rendering of fire, doing the mikra. Since there was a prophetic reference to the Ruach as a garment of light, I thought perhaps maybe God resolved this issue of our guilt by covering us with this garment of light, projecting it into the symbolism of the fire as presented during the fulfillment of the mikra. That seemed reasonable. However, matzah is not about the addition of something, but instead the removal of the contamination of religious and political guilt. It's not about light. It's about taking it into the darkness of Sheol. So the moment I came to realize that Dowd's Bashar body fulfilled Pesach, opening the doorway to life, and that his nephesh soul carried our guilt away, depositing it in the darkness of Sheol on Matzah, never to be seen again, my conjecture regarding the Spirit's garment of light became unnecessary clutter. So at this time, I also came to realize that I had been wrong regarding the Ruach even departing from Dowd during his fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Makodim. And this is because Yahweh told us explicitly that the Ruach would never separate from him. And of course, that means that the Ruach protected Dowd's Nefesh in Sheol and facilitated his release. This then means that the Ruach has to be a projected power and influence of God, not God himself. But that's not the end of what can be deduced from this, because it leads to another relevant assessment. You see, since the Ruach entered Sheol, the place of separation from God, the Spirit cannot be Yahweh. The Ruach is instead a projected manifestation of Yahweh's influence. I have the seven spirits of Yahweh, including the Spirit of Yahweh, the Ruach of Yahweh. That does make me God. It means that God is projecting his influence into me. So this is why the Spirit of Yahweh can be offered to a man, as is the case today with the Choter, without that man becoming divine. The Ruach, as the depiction, as it is depicted in Yeshaya, Isaiah 11, explains, contributes to, empowers, enables the intellect, understanding, counsel, courage, and knowledge of the Choter, so that he can more fully appreciate all that Yahweh has to offer and share it effectively. The Spirit is, therefore, the most powerful and capable tool at Yahweh's disposal. As for the Ishe, the fire during the Moedim, there was a better interpretation of that, one that I missed until we were doing a series of shows showing it outside, because it provides a powerful lesson for us all. You see, fire transforms dead and dying organic matter, physical beings, transforming them into light and to radiant energy. And of course, this is symbolic of the superior vessel that Yahweh intends for our souls, so that we can discard the limiting and decaying nature of our physical bodies, because they keep us here on earth when God wants us to soar through the stars with him. We can only do that when released from our physical bodies. Someone keeps on posting that, science has found a planet conducive to life 40 light years away, just 40 light years away. And then the next post you'll see the following: science has found a planet conducive to life just 20 light years away. And now there's one today: science has found a planet conducive to life just 4 light years away, which means it's near Proxima Centauri. The only problem with that, it's a red dwarf, and red dwarfs are too volatile to have life. And as I said, all right, so in the first instance, it's 400,000 years one way. In the second instance, it would be 200,000 years one way, 400,000 years round trip. And even in the, celestial neighborhood, it's 40,000 years one way. So, I'm sorry. You want to get off this planet? you can't have a body. Not a wee little body, not a body at all. It has to be, your soul has to be completely enveloped in light and energy. So fire transforms us. This is the metaphor that God is trying to convey so we can discard our limiting and decaying nature of our physical bodies and eventually leave Eden and leave Earth to explore the universe with Yahweh. When our nephesh is encapsulated in radiant energy and light, we are not only perfected and immortal, we are enabled and empowered and enriched. And by such a great magnitude in science, well, the transformation is measured in the square of the speed of light, the fastest thing in the universe. Now, this progression from a thoughtful interpretation of a vastly superior comprehension of Yahweh's methodology comes with observation and contemplation, building over decades. And the beauty of this process is that it becomes exponential. The more we know and understand, the better equipped we are to deduce a myriad of previously unseen insights. And we grow in our comprehension with God as a result. We are now growing exponentially. And having written now 35 books, comprised of uniquely amplified translations of the oldest extant resources, with the words scribed of man's religious corruptions, that I have come to learn more about Yahweh than anyone since the last of the prophets 25 centuries ago. There were thousands of profound and unheralded insights to share, with the proper pronunciation of Yahweh's name and the recognition of his beloved Son's achievements foremost among them. But that's when it became especially interesting, because now I'm finally in a position to educate Yehudim and Goyim and invite both to return to the garden, serving the purpose that the Tree of Lives can perform by way of performing as the Tree of Knowledge. So it's only after that I had written an entire library of volumes, many a dozen times over, and finally returned to Prophet of Doom, updating it as the 5 volumes of Goddamn Religion, that Yahweh announced that the marginal utility of newer editions of the YadaYahowah library would, well, be less valuable than what we'd achieve with the efficacy of a vlog. And all of the time that I was spending updating the previous volumes for all we have learned, there was no way we were going to reach God's people or fulfill the prophecies that were made of the Nakri and how he would speak to God's people. The last time Rich and I went over it and said, okay, we've learned so much that if we went through all of the books right now, first of all, by the time we got to the end, we'd have to start all over again because, well, we'd learned so much going through the process that we would have to start all over again to add to what we were adding to. That if I were to take half my time, 40 hours a week, it's a lot, half my time, 40 hours a week, and I were to do a page in 10 minutes to examine the translation and examine all of the commentary and update it all to bring it up to the current extent of what our knowledge is, not only would the volumes probably double in length, but sometimes that means that you can do 10 pages and or a page every 10 minutes, 6 pages an hour, and you, at the end of the time that you have invested, there's exactly as many pages resulting in the book to edit because, well, you've added that many new pages. But even if you didn't add a page, which, by the way, is impossible with added learning and knowledge, at 40 hours a week would take 2 years, 104 weeks. So we don't have that kind of time. So now it's time for us to do the Yahweh vlog, just as Yahweh had foretold. And so God informed his Choter that it was the right occasion to prioritize speaking over writing and fulfill all that he had written about Ha-Nakri, the observant foreigner. He took the man who had never himself posted such much as a single word online and transformed him into a vlogger, and turning our home into a bunch of studios, and now we're learning and sharing in real time with contemplation and communication literally occurring simultaneously and working as a team. You know, Rich is over there quietly to my right. I look at him from time to time. We don't do this unless we're working together. And behind the scenes, we also have Kevin that makes enormous contributions, as well as does my wife, Leah, and many others. It takes a family to share with you what we're doing. And now we're learning at such a prodigious pace. Even if our publisher and webmaster hadn't gone rogue, along with the psychic media manager, the recent tsunami of understanding has become so prolific that literally there is no time remaining to keep the library current. And that's okay, because what exists in these books is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. There's enough information accurately presented in these books that enhances the human understanding of God, who he is, what he's offering, and what he expects in return exponentially beyond even what any one of the prophets had conveyed, because it's the summation of all of the prophets. So recognizing that YadaYahowah has long been overwhelmingly more than sufficient to lead his people home, the better use of this opportunity was to share what we were discovering in real time. Unless you're, of course, the Wookiee, who is down there with his eyes closed. It's been a long day. You know, it's a tough job for, I'm here, you're talking about me.
Yeah.
So I'm embarrassed now, Dad. Why would you call me out like that? The YAHOWAH vlog has become the literal embodiment of all of these prophecies, pursuant to the Katan Mayor, the Etz Dayath, the Hanakri. We will vociferously share all that time and energy allow, doing so between now and the Shavua harvest, leaving a vast array of spoken and written words to guide Yisra'el through the first half of the time of trouble. And while we're away, YAHOWAH will, at his first order of business, explain what I may have missed, and I'm sure there's a lot, and all that needs to be enhanced and corrected, and will do so collaboratively in the timeless realm of Shamaim. And when we return, you can expect the best God has to offer from Yada and from Elia, all reinforced in the text and the video vlog from YadaYahowah, from the YAHOWAH vlog. And it's all going to scroll in the sky above our heads for the world to read and consider. So in conclusion, well, I have, as I've shared, a nefesh soul, and like you, and I have been afforded YAHOWAH 7 ruach spirits. That does not make me a mother. Similarly, the Choter is a man, and yet the attributes he is afforded are all scribed in the feminine form, as was Etz, becoming Etzah. Because they are being delivered by the ruach. And of course, while many of these titles that are designated to describe Yada's collaboration with YAHOWAH and with Dowd are masculine, some are also feminine. And indeed, Obed-Edom is symbolically presented as the Adam HaParah, a man presented as something that's a dual feminine, as this mission migrates from positioning the Ark of the Covenant for Dowd's return to serving as the sacrifice to prepare his people for his arrival. Yada as the bull doesn't become a heifer any more than a father is a mother. Now moving on, it's a subtle thing, but this initial introduction to Kara, to invite, to meet, to read, and to recite, which is the root of Mikra and Mikre, these invitations to be called out and to meet with God, this is what was used as the verb to describe man discussing the nature of life. It says, Adam summoned and met with, greeting by name, all of the animals, the birds of the sky, and every conscious life form of the expansive environment. But there was not found for the man, Adam, a helper, a supporter, an etzir, similar to and right for him. Genesis 2:20. Well, the other animals were great, but they were not particularly helpful or supportive because they were not sufficiently similar to man, his counterpart. Therefore, God created woman to be right for him, serving as his counterpart. And we are most effective, we're productive when we work together, and life is more enjoyable that way. Now, this no. We are about to sail into uncharted waters. That is because, as I have shared with you previously, the verb that Yahweh selected to present the conception and the arrival of woman is from man, in this case, is surprising. And as I shared with you in previous programs, it's nafal. It means to fall, to go from a higher position to a lower one. It can also convey becoming inferior through failure and neglect. And particularly insightful in this regard, the victims of the flood were nephalim, which means they're all a derivative of this verb. That's why God said he was sad that he had created man, because of the nephalim. Now, the reason God announced that he regretted having conceived man will soon be obvious to us. So this was not an auspicious occasion for God or for the man. What we have perceived as augmentative with the addition of woman was actually announcing the fall of man. He was being degraded, not while he slept but because he had been so listless. Man's decline was a result of Adam being tartama, lethargic, apathetic, showing signs of indifference and dullness. He appears to have shirked the work God intended, failing to be diligent. And isn't that the story of man? But look at the exemplars. Look at Noah. He was anything other than apathetic. Boy, he engaged. He built a daggone ark, a ship. You look at Moshe. I mean, the job he was asked to do, yes, was impossible. Exceedingly difficult, herding the malcontents across the desert. But he did it. He was never apathetic. When they charged at him, he shot right back. Hey, look at Dowd, man. Dowd was interesting because of the fluid nature of the man's personality, the fact that he had more personality than any 1,000 people. When he was unhappy with God, he said so. When he was thrilled with God, he said so. When he said, I'm going to make this sacrifice, he told us every detail about it and how excruciating it was going to be. Dowd was anything but listless. Man, that dude, he had it together. He was aggressive. He was interesting. He was a doer. Well, this reads, and I've shared this with you, but it bears repeating. So Yahweh Almighty, he caused the fall. He initiated the lowering to an inferior position over time. The man, for having been somewhat comatose due to his lack of work and of diligence. He slept, he was inert, he was inactive. So he grasped hold of one of the ribs, which was symbolic of his lameness from his side, the Tesla, his bones, his cartilage around the heart is from tasala, which means to be limp and lame. And he sutured up to isolate. He closed by shutting and therefore separating the place beneath and succeeding it with flesh, with the bashar, with the human herald. Bereshith, Genesis 2:21. So as I've shared with you before, I can't recall ever reading something this surprising. Yahweh has plainly stated that he caused the fall of man. He even announced the reason and for this whole thing, which is the key lesson we learned from the garden. God calls the fall of man because man was a deadbeat. He was listless. He was unengaged. He was uninteresting. He was right next to being comatose. He was inactive. He was inert. So it was a lack of work and of diligence. God wanted more. Adam didn't deliver. So I realized that YAHOWAH has covered considerable territory since introducing us to the concept of nephesh, a soul. And that is not even mentioned here, but it's the inference of what the word means that lingers over all of this. Because our nephesh, as our consciousness depicts, a living organism's ability to observe and to respond to stimuli in the surrounding environment. It is the essence of life, and it is what is being anesthetized here. Man had not been particularly aware or observant or responsive, which made him apathetic. This was not appealing to God, nor compatible with our design. Now, the implications are profound because this astutely depicts the nature of humanity throughout the ages, even to the present moment. The preponderance of people have been and remain appreciably degraded, tragically unaware, lacking initiative due to the neglect of our neshama, our conscience. This is the reason religion and politics have prevailed in controlling the masses, and why it's now or never for the restoration provided by the Tree of Knowledge. We've reached the point in time when the majority have lost the will and the ability to think. And the substitute is now being presented as artificial intelligence. That won't get it done. Now, beyond this realization, suggesting that most humans are neither worth saving or even capable of being redeemed, with the inclusion of the hiphil stem and imperfect conjugation modifying man's Nephal descent, this is strong medicine. YAHOWAH is admitting that he had a definite hand in the result for these reasons. And he must have seen or experienced something in Adam that caused him to realize that he was just another animal within the protected environment, and that as such he would never have developed the initiative or wherewithal to grow, to be anything more than a pet, just a better version of the other life forms. He would need, yes, to stub his toes, to develop character by overcoming challenges, learning by necessity. Even man would have to die to appreciate the value of life. The realization that God caused the fall of man by his own admission not only upends all that we have been led to believe, but it also prompts some initiative in us, if we are to appreciate why this would be so. And I think the answer is evident in the narrative itself. YAHOWAH was bored. Adam offered nothing of interest. He had no life experiences, no comparative way to even value the gift of life. He had learned very little, and he had achieved nothing. He had so little character that when he was tempted by the woman, he showed no resistance, no resilience, and he said nothing. He just followed along. He was a pet in a cage. Adam was insufficiently interesting to be entertaining. It is as if we were looking at, as I've said, a fish swimming in a bowl, somehow expecting something to change. After a few days, weeks, months, years, and nothing but an occasional bloop, bloop, and without challenges, obstacles, and predators to overcome, there was nothing in that bowl that would have led to a better result until that bowl became Yisra'el, and that animal became Dowd. And all of the ups and downs, the struggles, the battles, the successes, the lyrics, the lives, the lessons of Dowd Haha, now that was a different story. There was a life that sang all of the notes we could possibly want to hear. A life fully lived. So coddled animals, as we have learned, are dependent on the one caring for them. They do not exercise their muscles or their brains. They accomplish and contribute nothing. They're like parasites. They, as I've said, there's been countless studies on them, and you can even see it in real life. That the children spoiled by their parents or entitled by a society never grow. They have no value. They contribute nothing. We must work. We must learn if we wish to grow. And then we must stand once we have fallen if we want to show character. It is the only way to progress. It's the only way to contribute. It was also obvious that this encounter with the other animals didn't go particularly well. God clearly was not impressed. And so he created the woman to inspire something better. Men and women who could think, who could work together to survive, a place to prove ourselves. We would cultivate the land. We would build homes. We would conceive children. We would care for them. We would learn to stand by having fallen, only to get back up and to try again. Sure, most men and women would turn out to be bad, far worse than useless, but there would eventually be some worth the investment of time. 6,000 years later, there might be 6,000 qualified individuals. But even if there were only 6, that still would have been much better than on this day where there was none. Clearly, YAHOWAH didn't want a pet. He wanted an explorer, a companion, a student who would be capable of challenging him, questioning him, negotiating with him, and contributing to the relationship with him by having overcome some challenges, by learning and growing, by discovery. Therefore, God caused the fall of man so that one day men would rise wiser and better equipped for having overcome these challenges. And perhaps this prepares us to better understand the nature of the Etz tree. Remember, it wasn't all that long ago that we discovered that it is through etzeb, hard work, a struggle, that is particularly difficult and challenging, requiring considerable effort, even as the process can be mentally anguishing at times, that the etz becomes productive, and its fruit becomes desirable. We also found that as an etzab, the etz would work for and serve another, doing the job his sovereign and superior requested. This is the etz as the Choter stem, serving not only YAHOWAH and mankind, but in particular one man, the one represented by the etz Dowd. This appears to be the process and the result that God intended. We would become interesting by learning and applying that which captures our imagination and our desire to properly process the possibilities. We need to ponder the interpretation of the preceding, which read, if I can remind you, so YAHOWAH Almighty, he created the fall and caused the fall of man for having been somewhat lethargic due to a lack of work and diligence. He slept, inert and inactive, unmotivated and sedentary. So when he grasped one of his ribs, symbolic of that which was limp and lame, from his side he sutured him up and isolated the place beneath and succeeding it, even replacing it over time with the Bashar, human herald. Bereshith, Genesis 2:21. Well, that's eye-opening to be sure, folks. And Adam clearly was responsible for this outcome. He lacked the desire for diligence. It is a fact that should have become evident because after YAHOWAH told us that man's purpose would be to work in the garden and to be observant, we never heard or saw anything from Adam that actually showed that he improved his situation or made life interesting, or came to any meaningful conclusions from his observations. And perhaps this is foreshadowing the arrival of the Bashar Herald as the Etz Dayath, someone who would have heralded Dowd's accomplishments, all for man to return to the garden and to return to the Tree of Lives. At this point, I've already invested, as you know, 24 years of 12-hour days developing YadaYahowah. Sure, it's been rewarding, but it's also been challenging. And far more than most people can even comprehend. But imagine the effort required to invent an entirely new and better way to present God's testimony, then diligently pursuing this objective by scrubbing every word of the diacritical markings added thousands of years later by the Masoretes, while exploring every conceivable connotation derived from the oldest extant witnesses, then parlay that result into a wealth of relevant commentary and explanations as well as insights, like the ones we have just shared. Doing so, days became weeks, weeks became months, months years, and years decades, without ever relenting. Individually then, collectively, after that, we would become interesting to Yahweh, one word, one day at a time. It was possible, and God recognized it when he anesthetized man to conceive the woman, and that by doing so, he was launching the greatest experiment in universal history. And here we are. And to think, without the utter foolology of some of these in this cult pretending to speak for a spirit mom while disparaging Yahweh and the Choter, it's unlikely that we would return to the garden in pursuit of these lessons. And that would have left us bereft of some of the most relevant insights we've ever deduced. Not only did they fall prey to deceit and fall away, the only way that this all comes to fruition is for us to go back into this material, to follow it to where God's words lead, to learn from him, and then to share all of this in the space they vacated in social media to help others comprehend as our understanding and this communication coalesce into a timely and unified stream of consciousness, all at precisely the right moment. So the first man was apparently lazy, too inactive and sedentary for Yah's liking, making this evident that Tesla rib was removed from Adam. It's actually Tasala, which means limp and lame. Then as God sutured him up in place of that which had been developmentally disabled, Yahweh replaced this with a Bashar Herald. God wasn't giving up. He's rebooting the system. The game wasn't over. Nah, we're just beginning. Then Yahweh as God, he constructed with the rib, which he had taken from the man, a woman, and he brought her to the man, Adam. Bereshith 2:22. The woman was not only made for man, she was part of him. This means that it is likely that she came with a neshama, a conscience. And if so, this would have made her worth getting to know, would have made her an excellent contributor to the relationship. She would have had the potential to be of considerable value. Now, Yahweh could have selected an existing woman for Adam among the thousands that would have been scurrying outside of the Garden of Eden. But he did not do so for obvious reasons. Without an Asama conscience, the woman would have been vastly inferior to Adam, just as we are to other animals when we use our Nasama, and not so much when we don't. They would have had nothing to talk about or accomplish together. Moreover, as an outsider, she would have brought in all the world's problems, all the stuff that was going on outside of the garden, which would have been inappropriate, destroying Eden's purpose. Apparently, well, Adam understood the intent and appreciated the nature of God's gift. He responded with, and the man said, "This is the way to conduct one's life. La panam, the pattern of behavior that should be followed. It's essential nature. It's a sim. But of my essence, a living being is able to communicate intelligently as a bashar. For my desire to share positive thoughts as a herald for humanity, min bashar ani. For this reason, she shall be greeted welcome and called a woman, because out of man she was taken." Bereshith, Genesis 2:23. Best gift ever. Well, or so she would have been had Adam read the owner's manual and shared its contents with her. Well, certainly the operator's manual might be a better term. Now, the best way for us to conduct our lives is by living together, of course. Our essential nature was specifically designed for this purpose. Now, this is because we were conceived to model the covenant by conceiving children in a loving and supporting home, and then helping our children develop character to learn and to grow such that they can be productive and lead fulfilling lives. And speaking of our function and highest calling, I'm drawn to what, of course, were the dual inclusions of Bashar, herald. While Bashar is typically rendered as flesh, the verbal root, also spelled Bashar, speaks a different story. It means to convey a message, presenting what people need to know so that they are prepared for what is coming. This is to say, we should eagerly trumpet Yahweh's message, proclaiming everything he wants men and women to know. This is particularly so that we can invite all who will listen to meet with God by reading and reciting his words. Details can also be intriguing. Previously, when speaking of creating men and women, Yahweh chose Zakar, man. Remember, this was the memorable man, and then he chose Nakaba, female, to perforate and bore. Well, this time, woman is presented by Adam using the more common Isha, which is the feminine of Ish, man. In other words, God described her differently than did the man. Now, interjecting again and trying to read between the lines on how we came to this place, God created woman because it wasn't good for man to be alone. And as previously stated, the only way that man would have been alone in the garden is if God had given up on him and stopped peering into that fishbowl, expecting a different result. With one thing leading to another, Chawa was created so that after the fall, there would be a way to get back up again. The two would work together. So the next statement, I think it affirms everything that we have just deduced. Yahweh had been as a father to Adam, but now it was time for the lethargic son to move out of the house and to accomplish something on his own. And since he had conceived the first woman for this purpose, they wouldn't reproduce conceiving children with the woman. They would reproduce, I should say. They would conceive children with the woman engaged as a mother. And that is precisely why that has led to this result. God said, accordingly, therefore, the man should leave his father and his mother and engage, becoming close with his woman, and they shall exist as a unified declaration regarding heralding the pronouncements of life. Bereshith, Genesis 12:24. And so it would be, even with the first family. The fracture would eventually heal, and time and children would come forth. With time, children would be conceived. But alas, the journey would not be easy. No, not for humankind. From Adam and Chawa came Cain and Hebel, and evermore Azab, separation. Men and women would not do well on our own recognizance, and yet there would be a pronouncement worth heralding in the end. And we would ultimately achieve results that were worth mentioning and be of like mind and purpose regarding the Bashar Herald when we conveyed the essential pronouncements of life here now in the flesh for all to hear. Now, this also sheds additional light on the fifth instruction that was etched in stone, because it instructs us to leave, even reject, our father and mother, and Azab, forsaking them, would hardly be a way of honoring them, now would it? And therefore, there must be another father and mother who fit that bill in the fifth statement etched in stone, the second on the second tablet. And so there are with Abraham and Sarah, being the example of the mother and father of the covenant, they lead us back home to God, back into the family. And speaking of the bereth, this is indicative of the first condition where we're asked to walk away from the family of man and unto the family of God. This is why Abraham and Sarah left Babel and why we were told to leave our father's house as a condition of participating in the covenant. So as we approach the culmination of life as it had transpired outside of the garden and near the time that we're invited to return to Eden, I'm reminded of the essential role that God has this Bashar Herald play when determining who will be allowed back in to the Gan Eden. This additional iteration of Bashar is indicative of the fact that the most recent attacks launched at the Bashar and YadaYahowah are by the cult whose spirit mom didn't much like the Choter. Through her cult, she has voiced her opposition to nudity. This in response to me pointing out what I thought was obvious. Since we're being invited back into the garden, we should be comfortable being completely exposed to Yahowah. Now, I know so because in the Gan, we wore a little more than a smile. Unlike the religious and the conspiratorial, we should have nothing to hide from God. So initially, Adam and Chawah were comfortable being exposed in his presence, but not so apparently with the mother goddesses or their devotees. And the two, the man and the woman, were naked. And they were not ashamed. They were not wrong. They were not disapproved. They were not mistaken. They were not the least bit stressed over it. Barashith in the beginning, Genesis 2:25. Unfortunately for mankind, our innocence wouldn't last. We would shame ourselves with the practice that we have refined over time. So as you will note with Azab, abandonment, with it came trouble. And at this point, well, if I said trouble, I meant to say trouble, because entered the serpent. And that is the place we will pick up as we resume our story. I know some of this has been repetitive, but we took a bit of a break from going over our story of returning to the garden. And it is so essential to our understanding that I wanted to do the best Yahowah impersonation that I could, which is to be one who would tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then tell you what I've told you. It is the only way we learn. It's how we process information. As we reinforce what we have heard from God, then we can literally integrate it into who we are. That we can always bring it up as you would bring water up from a well, and use what we have learned when it is necessary. When we reach a situation where that understanding will play a significant role in our lives or in someone else's life. So it's very, very important that we come to appreciate why it was that God caused the fall of man. What Adam failed to do that Dowd later achieved. So we would know why one caused death and the other brings life. And that is the purpose of the Tree of Knowledge. So thank you for listening. Good day.